join Dr. Dutch with the Neuro-Affirming Conversation Hour for outreach and support.
Good morning, good evening, or good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to NACHOS, the Neuro-Affirming Conversation Hour for outreach and support. And I am your host, as always, Dr. Adam Dutch Hazlett, and I am so glad that you're here. This space is where curiosity is honored, compassion is essential, and the full complexity of the human experience is not only welcomed, it is celebrated. Today is June 16th, and believe it or not, this date marks an anniversary of the world's very first roller coaster opening up to the public in 1884. This happened in Coney Island. Thrill seekers lined up for a new kind of experience, one that was designed to feel like chaos, but was secretly held together by structure, planning, and trust in the ride. And honestly, that feels like a pretty good metaphor for being human, especially for those of us who are neurodivergent. Life, like a roller coaster, doesn't always offer us a chance to control the track. Sometimes we're climbing that slow, suspenseful hill, not sure what's coming next. And sometimes we're twisting through sharp turns that no one warned us about. And sometimes, if we're lucky, we get a moment of joy, of weightlessness, of throwing our arms up and letting ourselves feel alive. But here's the thing. Even when the ride gets bumpy, even when we can't see the turns ahead, we deserve spaces that let us breathe, that help us regulate, and that remind us that it's okay to feel everything along the way. And that's what NACHOS is all about. It's not about fixing. It's not about pathologizing, just riding the ride together. With grace, with knowledge, and with a snack or two along the way. So buckle up, Nacho Nuts. Today's episode invites us to look at the ups and downs of our stories with fresh eyes. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is to hold on and to keep writing. And speaking of wild rides, I have some thrilling news of my own to share with you today. I'm incredibly honored and beyond excited to announce that I've been selected as a trail guide, and that is CASY speak for presenter for this year's CASY Summer Camp. And it's entitled Your Compass to Self-Care, and this is hosted by the Cultural Autism Studies at Yale program. And yes, you heard that right, Yale University. And to be part of this groundbreaking summer series rooted in autistic culture and community care and radical rest feels like the perfect convergence of everything that we have celebrated and worked on here at NACHOS. As someone who has spent my life advocating for welcoming spaces, neurodivergent inclusion, and neuro-affirming practices, whether I knew it or not, being invited into this space of shared wisdom and creative care is more than just exciting. It's deeply meaningful. So camp kicks off Sunday, June 22nd at 4:30 p.m. Central with our campfire kickoff, a joyful virtual gathering filled with connection, creativity, and a few surprises. The whole series features sessions from autistic thinkers, artists, and advocates who are reshaping what care looks like on our own terms and in our own time. So if you're someone who's felt like you've been riding life's roller coaster without a map or without a break, this is the camp for you. And yes, there will be trail maps, digital badges, and even a trail guide packed with self-care tools. I can't wait to connect, reflect, and share space with this beautiful community and to speak from a place of lived experience, deep compassion, and unwavering hope. So let the countdown to CASY Summer Camp begin. And I'm filled with gratitude for opportunities like this where autistic voices are not only included, but centered, uplifted, and celebrated. Being invited to speak at Yale is a personal milestone, but it's even more important than that. It's a reflection of what we've been building together here in the NACHOS community. Week after week, after week after week, we've gathered in this space not just to talk, but to listen, to share stories, to share strategies, to share struggles and wins, and slowly, intentionally, we've built something powerful. A community rooted in care, fueled by lived experience, and guided by the belief that we all deserve to be seen, supported, and affirmed. It's because of you and because of this community that our voices are resonating beyond the margins and our stories are being heard. Our work is growing. Our reach is expanding into spaces where change is long overdue. So thank you, Nacho Knots. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for believing that being human is enough. And thank you for helping turn this roller coaster of a world into something just a little more navigable and a lot more kind. And it's not just the emotional or cultural significance that's growing, it's the science too. Because while we've been building this community of care, researchers have been mapping something equally important: how our bodies and brains respond to movement, to care, and to rest. Something we talk about a lot here. Now, a new study released this week by Mass General Brigham and SUNY Upstate offers a powerful reminder of the very thing we've been saying all along. The smallest acts of care are not small at all. So let me take you into the findings here. Using the sophisticated technique called single nuclear RNA sequencing, researchers studied the brains of mice with a common model of Alzheimer's disease. The question was, what happens to the brain when you add movement, specifically running? And the results were astonishing. Memory-related genes lit up in brain areas, especially the hippocampus, the part of the brain responsible for learning, responsible for memory, and for emotional processing. The microglia, the brain's immune cells, shifted out of the inflammatory state, and instead of being stuck in defensive mode, they began supporting cognitive function. Most notably, scientists discovered a new subtype of astrocyte. Now, these are cells that support the brain's neurons, and this is called a neurovascular associated astrocyte, or an NVA. And these cells responded robustly to exercise, suggesting that they play a vital role in how movement supports overall brain health. And this wasn't just a mouse story. When researchers compared these results to human brain samples, they saw similar patterns. In other words, movement shapes the brain across species, across contexts, and across lives. So what's the meaning of all this? Well, neuroplasticity in motion, this is what the meaning. What this study tells us is that even in the midst of disease, or perhaps especially in the midst of disease, our brains respond responsively to care. Movement doesn't just help us feel better, it literally reshapes our brain's internal chemistry. It creates room for memory. It creates room for regeneration and for healing. At NACHOS, we talk a lot about radical rest, community care, and building sustainable structures for our neurodivergent lives. But this study reminds us that structure doesn't have to be static. Sometimes structure means rhythm, flow, movement, a walk, a stim, a dance break between Zoom calls, a nervous bounce that no longer needs to be hidden. It's all valid, and it's all part of the ride. Now, while our last story, this story, leans into movement, rest, and the very real biology of care, it reminds me that life doesn't always have to be intense. A little sweetness goes a long way too. And that brings me to a new study, and this was just released June 13th from the Genomic Press, and it was featured in Science Daily. And yes, it's about something refreshingly light. A tiny sugar coat on our brain's blood vessels that may offer powerful protection. Like an M&M. Now, Dr. Sophia Shi and her team at Stanford and now Harvard have uncovered something remarkable in the brain's vascular system. It's called the glycocalyx. All right. And this is a delicate forest of sugar molecules that line the blood-brain barrier vessels, or the blood-brain barrier vessels. Holy crap, say that fast 3 times. Now, what were the findings of this study? As we age, this sugar layer thins dramatically, and this damages the barrier's integrity, and it invites inflammation. Now, both of these are key contributors to cognitive decline and things like Alzheimer's disease, what we talked about in this last one. Now, when they look at aged mice in these models, restoring this sugar coating not only repaired the blood-brain barrier, but also reversed memory loss. Now, this is the first demonstration that aging-related vascular damage can be reversed by rebuilding our natural sugar shield. I didn't even know we had a natural sugar shield. Now, why does this matter? What looks like a simple sugar film is at the molecular level a powerful, powerful guardrail. It calms neuroinflammation. It protects against toxic leak-in and supports healthy brain function. So our focus, if you think about it here at NACHOS, has often been on invisible care, on movement, on rest, and on connection. And this research reminds us that even shifts we don't see, like rebuilding a sugar coat, can radically change our capacity for thought and for memory. Reversibility is radical. We tend to think of aging or decline as a one-way street. But this study rewrites that narrative. With the right conditions, repair is possible, even later in life. So in neurodivergent care, we talk about rhythm over expectation. Small, predictable acts that protect us from overwhelm and burnout. This sugar coat study is the biological analogy, a thin layer that shields and supports, and it builds one molecule at a time. So if today your care looked like a stretch break, a safe snack, or a sensory cushion, you were rebuilding your glycocalyx. Holy crap. And you're building this in community and at the cellular level. So not all wins, if you think about it, need to be dramatic. Sometimes the most profound healing comes from adding a thin, sweet layer of protection. A moment of kindness, a sensory break, a pause to rebuild, to reframe. And in that seeming simplicity, like restoring sugar to a barrier, we create space for memory and for clarity and for a bit more ease on this complex roller coaster ride of life. Now, we're talking about this sugar coating, this microscopic layer that can quietly guard against damage and even restore memory as we age. It reminds me how often protection doesn't come from something loud or obvious. Sometimes it is that thin layer. Sometimes it is that brief moment between chaos and care. And this idea carries us right into the next story, because just like when we sometimes need a shield, we also need reminders, especially when the noise of life drowns them out. Now, researchers at USC recently uncovered something beautifully complex in its simplicity. Our brains hold memories of meals, and those memories help regulate our hunger. In a series of experiments with rats, scientists found that when animals paused during eating, their brains logged that moment. Basically, they marked it not just as food, but as an event, a memory, a confirmation that nourishment had occurred. But when those memory-stirring neurons in the hippocampus were disrupted, or basically when the animals were distracted, something changed. The rats forgot that they had eaten. And they kept eating long after their bodies had what they needed. And it's not a story about self-control. It's a story about connection, because this wasn't an act of will. It's a reminder that memory and presence and regulation are all intertwined. And it also helps us explain something many of us in the neurodivergent community know intimately. When we eat on autopilot, when we power through meals without noticing, when our days are stitched together with executive function sprints and sensory overload, we can lose the ability to feel that we've eaten at all. Sometimes we lose the ability to know that we were even there at all. So this isn't about blame, and it's about insight. The hippocampus, long known for storing emotional and spatial memory, also plays a role in feeding back to the brain. You've done this. You're okay. You're full. So if we're going to blame anybody, let's blame the hippocampus. And if you think about that loop of you've done this, you've eaten, you're full. If that's interrupted, whether by distraction or stress or masking or just the relentless churn of modern life, our body may keep asking a question it never got an answer to. Am I nourished? And what this research offers is a reframing. Maybe we don't just need food. Maybe we need confirmation of care when we eat. Not just the nutrients, but the noticedness. Not just calories, but memory. That's what turns a meal into regulation. That's what turns a meal into something sacred, something human, something transcendently divine in an interrelational sense. So the next time you sit down to eat, if you're able, take the pause. Let the moment land. Let your brain remember that you gave it something, that you were here and that you matter. And that idea, this elegant interaction between mind and body, between biology and memory, it leads us into one of the most fascinating frontiers in neuroscience today. A question not just of how the brain responds to its environments, but how it might one day interface with it directly. We just walked through how the hippocampus holds record of our meals, and it turns food into feelings of fullness. Now imagine if our memories and even our voices could bypass all biological drift entirely. And that's where the next story takes us. A stride into a frontier where the brain doesn't just evolve, it interfaces. At UC Davis, they've unveiled a stunning breakthrough. A brain-computer interface, or BCI, that decodes neural activity in real time and transforms it into speech. Livable, tone-inflected speech. And this is for someone with ALS. And so instead of typing messages one letter at a time, the participant speaks naturally. The system reads his brain signals via microelectrode implants in the speech production region of his brain, and that feeds them into a fast-moving AI that then filters them through a digital voice synthesizer. And this allows him not only to talk, but also to ask questions, to interrupt conversations, and even sing melodies with delays as brief as 25 milliseconds. This is a real-time lifeline between mind and voice. Now, I want you to think about this for a moment. Centuries of silence erased in an instant through technology that uplifts intention as voice. Beyond utility, this BCI is about reclamation. It's about restoring not just words, but rhythm and presence and belonging. And what makes this so resonant for the NACHOS community is how powerfully it reflects our core themes. Agency over everything. Just as we celebrate small acts of care, this BCI restores the right to a voice, an embodied marker of presence and self. Now, If you think about this technology isn't trying to normalize speech. It's amplifying the speaker's own neural patterns, their tone, their intention, and their rhythm. So it is different than a talker. And this interface rebuilds that bridge one thought at a time. And it also raises questions that mirror our conversations. What does it feel like to speak when your voice is mediated? How do we build trust around tech that touches our neural selves? How do we ensure access, constant access? How do we ensure consent, informed consent, and care for those who need this technology the most? Now, this story is just one case of a broader horizon unfolding: movement, memory, and now language in real time. Mind to world interfaces in real time. It's crazy. It's a reminder that our brains are not static. They're conversational, they're connected, and they're remarkably adaptable. So where will we go next? That's the ride ahead. And that's the ride that we take together. Now let's shift from these kind of talks of interface and these tech layers into a territory that may feel unexpectedly familiar, into the realm of time itself. And we've talked about time on Nachos before, because again, in some cultures, neurodivergent people, especially autistic people, are considered people in their own space and time. And so if you think about time itself and how our experience of it is deeply tied to who we are, this is especially resonant for all of us neurodivergents. So I want to lean into a story from Science Daily. And this resonated with me. A new study showed that our brains don't measure time like a clock, but by the events we live through. So we don't remember north, south, east, west. We remember landmarks and conversations and songs on the radio while we were going. In an experiment with rodents, researchers tracked neural activity in the anterior cingulate cortex, the ACC. And during repetitive tasks like poking a nose into a hole one time, then 70, then 200 times, basically repetitive tasks. But here's what they discovered when they did this study. No matter how fast or how slow these animals performed this task, their brains mapped how many actions they completed, not just how many seconds had passed. Now, this is fascinating because if you think about, it's a shift from clock time to what might be called event time. And I have a complicated relationship with the clock myself. But our brains don't register minutes and hours. They log and register moments of meaning, changes, and steps. This was something that was tried on me when I lived in Ghana. The idea that time was irrelevant to the conversation we are having. It's the same reason a fun day can feel over in an instant, because it's filled with rich, distinct events. And a boring stretch, say folding clothes or sitting at a board meeting, can stretch on and on because there's nothing new. Nothing happens. Nothing is registered. And for many of us in the neurodivergent community, this study lands close to home. We know that our experience of time isn't linear. It's patchy at best. It speeds up and slows down based on how our attention moves, on how our sensory info lands, on how newness or monotonous our moment-to-moment perception truly is. And we don't always operate smoothly within socially defined clock time. We may hyper-focus into a flow state, like where did the last few hours go? Or feel time drip unbearably when we're overstimulated or understimulated. And that's not a glitch. It's neurobiology. of event-based time. Now, this research doesn't just describe neurodivergence, it validates it. If our brains track time through difference and novelty, then living in a world that prizes uniform schedules and rigid duration is, well, deeply misaligned to who we are as humans. We shouldn't need to mask our time rhythms to fit the social clock. What we need is permission to live by our time, one event, one step, and one slice at a time. So consider this: breaking your day into meaningful chunks, not by the clock, but by tasks and by breaks and by transitions. Create sensory cues that mark time's passing. Light a candle. Set a timer with a chosen sound when you're moving between locations. Now, recognize that time feels different when you're engaged, and that's not your brain malfunctioning. It's your brain being itself. So what's the takeaway? Time isn't just a unit. It's not a measurement. It's a lived experience that's created in our brains by the differences that our brains perceive. And for neurodivergent folks, that means our lived time is valid, even if it looks or feels totally different than what most of us are told to expect. Now, what lies ahead is the question not just of how our brains keep track of time, but how we can reclaim it. Not by forcing ourselves to conform, but by honoring the moments that actually mean something. And if you think about it, Nacho Nuts, that's the journey worth writing. Journeys worth writing are rarely smooth. They almost never unfold in the neat arcs that were promised by the storybooks and by the movies, and definitely not by the productivity blogs. More often than not, they're full of side quests, unexpected detours that don't make any sense to anyone in the moment. But somehow, they stitch meaning into the fabric of our lives when we look back. Sometimes, the journey looks like starting something and never finishing it. A project you believed in, a relationship you poured yourself into, a routine you swore would be the thing that finally helped. And then life intervened, life happened, energy disappeared, regulations slipped, and your priorities reshuffled under the weight of simply surviving. And that's not failure. That's the ride. Other times, it's not the side quests that throw us. It's the barriers, the locked doors, the places where the rules don't flex even when your nervous system is begging for mercy, screaming for mercy. These are the inaccessible systems, the rigid expectations, the 1,000 tiny moments where you realize the world wasn't built with you in mind, and yet you still keep moving forward. And that's not just resilience, that's resistance. And sometimes, beautifully, quietly, the journey offers a moment of shift, a new way of doing something old, a pause that lands, a truth that feels like yours again. These aren't always big victories. They might feel like finally getting out of bed. They might feel like saying no without guilt, like letting yourself stim in the grocery store aisle. But they're real and they matter, because for many of us, being neurodivergent means living outside of linear maps. It means trusting a rhythm that others can't hear. And it means redefining what success and progress actually looks like, not as a constant or as an acceleration, but as learning to stay within ourselves throughout the detours, throughout the delays, and throughout the dizzy loops. So if your journey right now feels anything but straightforward, if it's full of interruptions, plot twists, or emotional pit stops, you're not lost. You're not lost at all. You're riding a path that asks a little more of you. One that may not make sense yet, but one that still matters. And one that still belongs entirely to you. Now, we've been exploring how time and memory shape our lived experience, from sugar coatings to the hippocampal pause between bites, and even to brain-computer interfaces that restore people's voices. All of these stories point to a deeper truth. Time isn't a straight line, especially for neurodivergent folks. Our experiences unfold not by the ticking of the clock, but by the moments that land, that resonate, and that linger. And sometimes by the moments that never do. So imagine this. It's Saturday morning. The world outside your window is waking, but you're still in bed, curled up, half awake. You've slept in a bit and your brain is finally letting go of the week's tension. That gentle drift between sleep and wakefulness may feel indulgent, but new research shows it might actually be essential, especially when the week has left us running on empty. A study out of the University of Oregon, it looked at how the weekend catch-up sleep affects mood in teenagers. So they used Fitbit trackers and and a few standardized behavioral surveys, and they looked at over almost 2,000 young people, and the average age about 13 and a half. And what they found was teens who overslept by more than 2 hours on the weekends reported more anxiety. It also found that teens who got some extra sleep up to 2 hours showed less anxiety, right? Overall. And the message wasn't sleep more, it's sleep just enough to matter. That Goldilocks spot, that sweet spot, that gentle cushion of rest. It helped calm emotional turbulence without tipping into sluggish dysregulation. So there is such a thing as too much of a good thing. And so for many of us in this community, weekends are the only spaces not defined by rigid routines, external expectations, and exhaustive cognitive energy drain. But even then, sleeping in can feel like a rebellion or even a threat. Am I wasting time? Am I lazy? What if I oversleep and I break momentum? Now, this research gives us something a bit more humane. It gives us validation for our rhythms. It gives us validation for that cushion of 2 hours because it isn't irresponsible. It's protective. It's not indulgent. It's restorative. It's the brain's way of saying, I see you were depleted, and I see you need some space and some time to regroup. And if you think about it, in a world that demands linear productivity, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, if you're lucky, this finding gives us permission to reclaim our time. Not to retreat from life, but to reconnect with ourselves, with our brains, and with our bodies. This extra hour in bed is not detachment, it's anchoring. It's how we shift the pendulum back toward balance after being swept up in external time. And this isn't just a study about teenagers. It's about neurodivergent life at any age. And when your brain runs hot due to social pressure or sensory input or masking, a little temporal latitude can be chemical, emotional, and even existential medicine. It tells your nervous system, you can breathe here. It says, you belong in your own space. So if rest feels fraught, if those voices in your head tell you time off is time lost, know that science disagrees. Moderate catch-up sleep isn't an exit strategy. It's a return map. It recalibrates time towards self-care, self-trust, and the rhythms that make space for you to exist fully and wholly. And speaking of existing fully and wholly, of honoring our needs, our rhythms, and our right to rest, I have a small but meaningful update to share, and it's one that speaks directly to how this community continues to evolve with care. Starting in August, so in about a month and a half, Nachos will be moving to a noon broadcast time. It's a gentle shift, but it's an important one, designed to make space for our West Coast Nacho Knots, so that they can join without having to rush their mornings. And also, it aligns with changes in my own schedule and capacity. Like so many of us, I'm learning to live in rhythm with my life's transitions instead of against them. This change is about sustainability for me, for you, and for these conversations. But more importantly, it's about sustaining this community. And sustainability is really what makes this community what it is. But if that's not the only change that's on the horizon. Some of you know that we've already launched a Discord community. And now, as we look ahead to the fall and what I sometimes call the house months, all right, where you're locked up in the house, we're going to be building that space out a little bit more intentionally. Because when the weather turns colder and social energy gets scarce, we need a place where we can drop in, be real, and feel seen. Starting soon, we'll begin hosting every other Monday community chats in Discord gently facilitated spaces. And this is designed to connect, to check in, and support one another. These will happen in the afternoon and again in the evening, and we're going to work this out so you can join when it feels right for you. We're also prepping to launch a live call-in show on weekday evenings, a space for real-time questions, reflections, and community support from all over the state and all over the country. The exact time is still being finalized and worked on, but the goal is simple: more voice, more connection, and more space to feel heard. So if you've been tuning into Nachos as a listener, now's your chance to become part of a living, breathing, growing community. One that will hold you through the quiet season, the dark, snowy seasons, through the heavy moments, and through the kind of days that don't fit into another's planner. Because we're not just broadcasting anymore, we're building. We're building something together. So more details will be coming soon. But in the meantime, I thank each and every one of you for being part of this and for showing up and for helping us create something that lives outside the clock and inside the heart. As different as these stories may seem, sugarcoating on blood vessels, a neuro memory of lunch, brain-computer interfaces turning thought into speech, a teenage sleep study, and a new understanding of how time itself is logged in the brain, they all circle the same central truth. Our lives are shaped by the unseen patterns that we carry. These stories aren't just about breakthroughs in neuroscience or adaptive technology. They're about recognition of care, even when it's subtle. Recognition of rhythm, even when it doesn't match the clock. Recognition of voices, even when they emerge through different channels. And recognition of presence, even when it's quiet or delayed. Each study gives language to something many neurodivergent people have known intuitively but struggled to validate. That being out of sync with the dominant pace or method doesn't mean being broken. It means being tuned to a different and equally meaningful frequency. What ties it all together is the quiet power of traces. These neural traces, molecular codings, memory loops, time marks, and rest rhythms, they don't shout, but they stay, and they shape us. And they remind us that even when the world isn't watching, we're registering everything. Our brains are learning, they're adapting, and they're affirming in their own time and on their own terms. And maybe that's the title we've been circling all along. The traces that hold us. Because in the end, whether we're navigating sharp turns, quiet mornings, or the soft resistance of showing up again, what sustains us are the things that linger, the things that catch, and the things that hold. The traces that hold us aren't always visible, but they're deeply felt. They're the grooves our routines etch into our day. The breath before the meltdown. The quiet recalibration that happens when we stim, when we stretch, or when we step away. Self-care, especially in the NACHOS community, isn't about luxury or escape. It's about cultivating those traces with intention. It's about building rituals that leave a mark not because they're grand, but because they're real. And when we choose to sleep in for 2 extra hours after having a hard week, we're leaving a trace of rest. When we pause long enough to notice that we're eating or gently remind ourselves to take a drink of water, we're strengthening the neural map that says, I'm worth attending to. And these aren't random acts. They're self-signals. They're little echoes that remind us that we exist, that we matter, that we belong not only in this world, but in our own bodies. And the science reinforces it. Our brains don't hold on to time in minutes. They hold on to time in meaning. They remember moments. So self-care isn't about controlling every second. It's about creating meaning-rich moments that we can return to, that help us feel regulated, rooted, and known. A sugar layer on a vessel, a pause before a bite. A thought turned into a voice. These are the physiological signatures of being cared for and being allowed to care for ourselves. So when we talk about building community here, whether through our new call-in shows or Discord chats or simple shift to a noon broadcast, it's all in service of one thing, of helping you create more traces, more moments of being seen, more cues of safety, more neural pathways that say you don't have to earn your existence. You already belong. And those traces, they hold. Even when the world moves too fast, even when we lose the plot, even when we forget to remember, they're waiting for us. Like kindness stored in the body, long-term memory. That's what self-care looks like here. Not a checklist, but a constellation of traces chosen and returned to again and again and again and again. So if today's episode resonated with you, I'd love to invite you to stay connected in whatever way works best for your rhythm. You can find us on YouTube, where full episodes of Nachos live each week with captions and visuals for deeper reflection. And if you prefer to listen on the go or in the quiet pockets of your day, the Nachos podcast is available wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple, Google, all those places. Just search Neuro-Affirming Conversation Hour for outreach and support, Nachos Humanities 101, and we'll be there. You can also join our growing Nachos Discord, a warm neuro-affirming community space where we'll be hosting live chats, sharing resources, and holding space every other Monday starting soon. And don't forget, we're going to have a live call-in show soon too. So keep your eyes and ears open. We'll announce all the details across platforms in the coming weeks. But before we close, just a quick programming note. There will be no new episode of Nachos next week on June 23rd. I'm going to be in Washington, D.C. presenting at the American Association on Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Conference. And again, I want to create memories and measure the time through my moments. Now, this particular conference is a gathering of advocates, scholars, and change makers working towards making a more inclusive world, of course. And I'm honored to be speaking about neurodivergent community care and sustainable support systems, and especially micro accommodations. And I'll be carrying all of you with me in that room. Some of you more so than you know. So we'll be back the following week with more stories, more science, and more soul. But until then, I want to leave you with this. A few reminders anchored in everything we've explored today. These aren't summaries, these are soul notes. The kind of truths that don't ask to be earned, they just ask to be remembered. So remember this. Your brain doesn't need to measure up to anyone else's pace because you're not behind. You're not broken. You're moving on a track that may not be visible to others, but it is your path, and it is valid. Your rhythms of rest, of hunger, of speech, and of memory, they're not flaws to fix. They're your body's language. They are how you speak safety into the world. When you listen to them, you're not giving up. You're coming home. Time isn't just a clock. Remember this one. Time isn't just a clock. It's a story your body is writing. And it's not a story in perfect order, not always legible, but it's honest and it's textured and it's real. Every moment that mattered, every pause, every breath, every blink of meaning, it's all part of that story. Even the smallest acts of care, a stretch, a pause, a stim, those leave traces that hold. That care that you offer yourself today might become tomorrow's regulation. It might become tomorrow's strength. It might even become tomorrow's grace. Remember, no act is too small to matter. And, and speaking of mattering, what about you? Do you matter? Of course you fucking do. You're already worthy. Not because of what you've done and not because of how well you've coped, but because you're here. You're still trying, you're still listening, you're still writing. You've locked in, you see that hill and you're like, I am here for the ride. And that's enough. It's more than enough. Because you're not a problem to solve. You're a person to support. And you're not too much. You are not too late, and you are not too far behind. You're on the ride. And that alone is something holy. Holy. So thank you, Nacho Knots. I want to thank you, each and every one of you, for letting this space be one of your traces, for weaving your story with ours week by week, day by day. So until next time, may your pauses be restorative, may your rhythms be respected, and your rest be real. Keep writing, keep noticing, and keep returning to yourself, because you are always worth the return. Until next time, I'll see you in 2 weeks.